Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AwardsWatch Oscar podcast. This is podcast number 29. It is Wednesday, October 14th, and I have a very special and returning guest with me today, culture editor for Vox.com, Todd VanDerWerff. Hello, Todd.
Hey, Eric. It's good to be here.
It is. All right, so what are we talking about today? We are going to chat a little bit. It's going to be a kind of a deviation from the normal just predictions and whatnot, although we will be talking about predictions. But I kind of wanted to talk about what I'm seeing this season with Oscar pundits and how they're making their predictions, because it feels like it's much more of a wait and see than it used to be in the past. Like it's like there's a real shift happening there. Yeah. And so what I'm kind of seeing a lot too is, something will hit the festivals and it gets crowned very quickly, like the new front runner. And that seems to be because this season, and I don't know if you'll agree, Todd, has been rather free of front runners in pretty much every category. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Spotlight is sort of this front runner just because there's not really anything else that's an obvious pick, and I think we'll get into, why this is the case this year in particular. Oh. It's definitely a year where there are just very few categories where people feel comfortable anointing a front runner, and honestly, I think it's an interesting year as well in that, for instance, a lot of things are flipped on their ear. Like the Best Actress race is way more exciting than the Best Actor race this year.
Yeah, which is surprisingly lean versus just the last year, which had just too many. It's funny and I can't really put my finger on it, but you mentioned Spotlight and something about it. I don't know. This will probably rub people the wrong way, and I certainly don't intend to. But or maybe I do a tiny bit. But the response to it from entertainment journalists was overwhelmingly positive, and I feel like, and there were a few whose tweets I saw that kind of just did have me roll my eyes a little bit. Is that I'm wondering if that there is this sort of kinship feeling that this is a movie about journalists that break this big story and they're very heroic and they win Pulitzers and it's a big deal, although the movie itself is extremely understated, and maybe that there's just sort of a personal connection to it as well. I don't know.
I think that's probably part of it. I think it has a good story behind it, in that Tom McCarthy had such a terrible movie come out earlier this year in The Cobbler, and now he's got this by everybody. I think that it is the one movie this year where when you hear the description of it and you see the critical raves for it, you're like, okay, yeah, that's probably in the Oscar race. There are a lot of movies where critics raves, or they have the right description, but they don't have both. Mad Max Fury Road is one of the best reviewed movies of the year, but you hear the plot synopsis of that and you don't think Oscar movie. Conversely, you hear The Danish Girl has a very Oscar-y plot summary, but the reviews have been kind of soft. So it's definitely a year where we don't have two or three contenders in that regard, and that's kind of weird at this point.
It is, and bringing up The Danish Girl brings up an interesting point, and that, or to me it is, and that's that what I've seen so far this season is a lot of things that seem like they were going to be very major players are really falling apart, either with mediocre reviews or flat out pans.
Right.
Like Julianne Moore, who just won Best Actress finally. Her follow-up seemed like an equally Oscar baity, I have a diseased and I'm dying movie.
Yeah.
But the movie itself is actually kind of really bad. And I feel bad because it's a good story. It's an important story. And Ellen Page, it's like a passion project for her, and it's taken 10 years to happen. And, it doesn't, all of that narrative doesn't make a good movie, but it makes, a nice narrative. But, that kind of just fell through. Our Brand is Crisis seemed like it might be, a really good vehicle for Sandra Bullock and sort of in the Argo vein. And that just flopped at Toronto too. Yeah,
absolutely. It's gotten to the point now where I'm kind of like, there's sort of the conventional wisdom that forms around this time of year, like, I want to say 15 to 20 movies that have a shot. And then by January, it's usually down to like 10 or 12, somewhere in that range. So, but it's gotten to the point this year where I'm just sort of casting about and looking at like very weird possibilities. Like, there's a part in the back of my head that keeps insisting that Sylvester Stallone is going to win Best Supporting Actor for Creed, just because, like, that's the kind of thing that happens in a year like this, where, like, there's all sorts of weird stuff just sort of percolating around the edges.
It is. There's a little bit, there's a kernel of truth and possibility to that. I don't know about a win, but we had one of our AwardsWatch members pen this really great article that was making this correlation between Warner Brothers and being able to get Best Supporting Actor nominations pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And it was good. It was quite convincing. And, AwardsWatch gets pretty old-fashioned and pretty mired in statistic and history a lot. I fully admit. But it's generally a good place to start. And so when that piece came out, we were like, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense, and all just started looking, every year for what Warner Brothers actor is going to get, into supporting actor.
Yeah.
And, we did have Robert Duvall get in for the judge for a movie that was panned horrifically, didn't do well, and nobody cared about. So it kind of lent a little bit of credence to that. And then, not to use credence as a pun, but then now we have Sylvester Stallone in Creed this year. And just from the trailer, he cries, he's in the hospital. There could be something to it. I'm not going to dismiss that in any way whatsoever.
Well, I'm glad you can see it. So it's just... it is just this year where it feels like people are kind of having the Oscar conversation just to have the Oscar conversation in some cases.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're much more cautious, and have been getting more cautious for a couple of years now, about not talking about movies they haven't seen yet.
Yep.
Which has been kind of strange. Like, I assumed the build-up to Bridge of Spies, which I've seen and it is fine, but I don't think it's going to be a major player. I assumed the build-up to Bridge of Spies would be filled with, enthusiastic discussion of how that movie was an Oscar surefire thing, and it would get built up way too heavily. Like, in some ways happened with Lincoln. Like, and Lincoln was a really good movie that I really enjoyed, but I think that it was kind of undone by its own hype.
Yeah.
And this year there just wasn't anything like that, despite having, Spielberg and Hanks and Coen brothers and all sorts of Oscar favorites in there. So it feels like there's definitely trepidation this year about talking about movies people haven't seen, outside of The Revenant, which I think people are really excited about from the trailer.
Yeah.
And to me, just doesn't seem like it's going to be that. I'm sure it'll get a number of nominations, but it seems so grim. It doesn't seem up their alley. So
it does. There's something about it that seems like it's either going to do extremely well or not that well at all. And looking, not to beat a dead horse or bear, but looking historically, when a director wins Best Director and Picture, it's extremely rare for his very next movie to be, a big major player again.
Yeah,
Clint Eastwood was the last person to do that in the last decade, I think.
Yeah.
But I wanted to jump on something that you mentioned, that the the pundits' trepidation has been for the last couple of years, and I definitely agree with that. I feel like the Social Network King's Speech year was kind of a breaking point for this idea that critics and pundits were, I guess, helping shape the conversation and the race, because traditionally they've been able to pretty successfully, and I don't know if it's just the influx of intense social media that allows thousands and thousands of people to make a judgment very quickly, or what. But between that 2010 year and then also, like you mentioned, Lincoln, which was critically really loved and overall pretty shunned Oscar-wise, except for the two that it got, and then culminating in Boyhood this year.
Right.
I think there's just this feeling of, I don't know, maybe that critics or pundits feel like they almost have been beating their heads against the wall trying to push something, and then now are just kind of going with what the flow looks like in the moment, so that they're not burned. Is that crazy?
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that the early frontrunner thing, outside of a year like 2013, where the frontrunner seemed to change every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Where it started out as 12 Years a Slave, but then for a long time it was American Hustle, then for a long time it was Gravity, and then it looped back around at the very end. Like, that was, outside of a year like that early frontrunner thing is so damaging, unless you're like the artist and it's just a weak year and nothing comes up to dethrone you. Like, right now, unless Joy, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, unless Joy comes out and is just a sensation, like, I could see the Spotlight winning just because there's, really nothing else to be the consensus choice. Like, I've seen I think David Poland tried to suggest The Martian could end up being a consensus choice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it. I could certainly see a situation, though, where Ridley Scott wins director because he's been around so long, and, something like Spotlight wins picture. But it just, there's no really strong loves this movie choice, and that's the one thing Spotlight has going for it, is like nobody seems to hate it. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's got the support of critics. It has the support of the people involved that the movie's about, which is always really helpful. When you do a type of biopic, it's very easy, especially if you're a rival studio, to do a little bit of dirt digging and find, people to say bad things about it. Like, this is totally inaccurate, and this person was a horrible person. And there isn't a backlash to be had really so far for something like Spotlight, which is good, because that is another thing that can be really crucial in a race. It needs to be the movie that is basically, the least offensive that anybody can kind of like, and hopefully doesn't have too much in the negative pile.
Yeah. But another thing that I think is happening this year is we've seen, again, outside of Joy and the Revenant and the Hateful Eight, I don't think there are any other major unseen ones that seem like they're going to be major players. Outside of those three, we've seen about everything, and sort of the Oscar punditry is like very dismissive, or they're all very dismissive of different things, but inevitably they'll be dismissive of some of these movies. And what's sort of fascinating to me about it is that so many of the big players this year are films fronted by, telling stories about, driven by women, which is very unusual in the Oscar race. And nobody quite knows what to do about that. Like, they don't, because the idea is that the Academy is so masculine and so male, whatever, that they would never embrace a movie about a woman, whether that's, Room or Joy or Carol, or any of these number of contenders, or even like something like Inside Out, which obviously has other problems, standing in the way of it winning Best Picture.
Sure.
But there's definitely sort of this weird feeling that like we're waiting for the movie about guys to come out, and it just hasn't yet.
I think it's I think it's that. It's also too, when you look at what is going to make up a potential, top 8, 9, or 10, however many it is. You look at Carol, Room, and Joy, of these female-fronted, very strong women films, and you start. This is going to sound so much worse than I mean to. You start picking them apart, thinking, okay, they're not going to go for all three because they're about women. Which is the one that's going to be the most successful? And I kind of have been doing that a little bit. I just saw Carol. I think I'm seeing Room on Monday, and I haven't seen Joy yet. But I don't know. You try and get into the heads of AMPAS voters who are, primarily over 65 white men, and you have to try and think, what are they going to go for? Are they going to go for this, fantastic 1950s lesbian movie? Are they going to go for this contemporary American woman success story? I mean, what are they going to go for? Or are they going to completely deviate and look at, the Hateful Eight and the Revenant and Steve Jobs and even Spotlight, which is very, very male dominated, or Bridge of Spies for that matter, because time-wise that speaks to, a great deal of the voting membership. It's tough. I hate looking at a woman's film or a couple of women's films and having to think, is it likable enough, or is it? It's frustrating.
I think punditry that's been written. God, Oscar punditry. What does that even mean?
I know.
That's been written in the last 5 years. Is Mark Harris wrote a thing at Grantland about not trying to understand the films that get nominated in terms of the demographics, like racial, gender, that sort of breakdown, but in terms of what the voters, what these individual groups within the Academy are looking for. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a big group that really wants to see big technical achievements. They voted for Lord of the Rings. They voted for some of these larger movies that have gotten in there. Like, they are probably like Mad Max's best hope this year.
Yes.
And then there's the group that wants to see like really well-directed, really intricately artistic movies, and like that's Carol's best hope. So I think if you look at these movies that are female-led, they all have vastly different approaches. Like, it's hard for me to think about a movie like Carol and a movie like Room and think that the same kind of person would be voting for them just because they both are led by a woman. Like,
yes.
They have very different audiences, and it's a very large votership. So I guess one of the things I've been wondering about is when we are doing these Oscar predictions, when we're talking about, well, what are the Oscars going to like, we tend to get stuck in this sort of this view of them as like they're not going to be able to appreciate a movie about women. When in the past the Oscars have appreciated movies about women, several times. It's just in the last 10 years that they've really kind of fallen off of that. And we're sort of, in some ways, I think the Crash victory broke a lot of people. Like you look back at the King's Speech versus Social Network, but I think Crash it solidified a view of the Academy as conservative that the Academy is working very hard to repair. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as we saw with Selma earlier this year, they have not quite gotten all the way yet. But Selma had problems beyond just its subject matter.
Absolutely.
So I think that there is a tendency to write off the Academy as being more conservative than I think it actually is. Now, we may get to a point where like only one of these movies is nominated or none of these movies are nominated, and it's just like a bunch of dudes. So like Black Mass gets in there somehow.
Oh gosh, I was trying to not even mention that.
I will be like, well, okay, so the pundits were right about this, but I really think that these movies are different enough they can all exist alongside each other and then lose to Spotlight.
True, and that's something I just mentioned to someone yesterday is that when I'm personally putting together, a list of what I think will be a Best Picture nominee, I have to look at the whole list. I have to look at the fact that every year, whether it's 5 Best Picture nominees or 8, 9, or 10, every year has a tremendous amount of balance. There is no overriding type of movie that gets in. So that's really good for passion votes. And something that Ann Thompson always says, which I really like, is that Best Picture is built around the other categories that it can get in, and the passion within each of those groups, which I think is really good. I think it's a great comment, and something like that speaks very well to something like Mad Max. Yeah. Which should presumably be able to do pretty well on the technical side. It is Warner Brothers. They're having a horrible year. So it makes a lot of sense for them to just say, all right, this is our horse. Let's go with it.
This is the thing. I'm going to deviate to the Emmys a little bit, because that's a world I'm a little stronger in.
Good. I'm cool with that.
And knowing people within the Academy. But one of the things that sort of drives, I think, awards pundits nuts is thinking about these things, like Ann Thompson said, like very holistically. Like, I have a tendency at the Emmys, and this sometimes gets me, guides me wrong, to look at like the shows in terms of like patterns of acceptance. Mm-hmm. Modern Family this year, and it ultimately lost for the first time ever. And they were just predicting it because it always wins. And sort of their understanding of the Emmys is the thing that wins always wins. But if you looked at the wins that the show had gotten over the years and the nominations it had gotten over the years, it was clear they were losing favor with it. They were just looking for something else to throw to.
Yeah.
And I thought that was going to be Transparent, and it ended up being Veep. But
so did I.
I imagine Transparent was a pretty strong runner-up.
Yes.
There's a tendency to think about things as individual units, because I think we think of these awards races as competitions, because they are in some ways, but and also because everybody is essentially voting for one film when you look at how the Oscars count ballots.
Yes.
But there is that everything does sort of make sense as a picture of what came before. It's not saying they're nominating the best movies. Like last year, Lord knows they didn't. But they are reacting to trends within the industry and trying to say, this is who we are as an industry. And it is weird that it seems to travel sort of in reactive cycles. Like 2013 was one of the most diverse years in Oscar history, so 2014 was the least diverse year in recent Oscar history. So now 2015 feels like, well, maybe we can swing back the other way a little bit. Like maybe this is the year that we acknowledge that Hollywood can tell stories about women, who make up half of the species.
It's every yes, absolutely. And every year that they don't do it as much anymore, but I always used to remember so many years that got heralded the year of the woman.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, really? Do you really mean that? Because I don't think you do. But I have to say, this year seems closer to that than any in quite some time. Even something like Suffragette, which topically is incredibly important, but doesn't really seem to have had the impact, even though it hasn't even come out yet, that I think a lot of people thought it was going to have.
I'm seeing that Thursday. I'm intrigued to see it, because it got hit right away with with pretty weak reviews, and then as time has gone on, the reviews have started creeping upward.
It's doing pretty well.
There is definitely an argument to be made where, you could see, if the Danish Girl comes out and just bombs with critics, you could see folks being tempted by saying, let's go all in on Suffragette. And certainly, Carey Mulligan is a distinct possibility, even if that doesn't happen. But yeah, definitely, Meryl Streep said this thing, and Suffragette has also been buffeted by terrible publicity in just every single way. And Meryl Streep said this thing about male film critics kind of burying the film, and she wouldn't count it on Rotten Tomatoes, and a lot of people made fun of her for that. But she has a point. You look at most of the leading film critics, they're men. You look at most of the Oscar pundits outside of Ann Thompson and Saoirse Stone, like the big names are all men, and it's like, as a man, as someone who is a man, like there's definitely a thing where sometimes I'll be like, I don't connect as readily to a story led by women. Now, I think that a great film overcomes that. I think that Carol, I think that Room, I think they overcome that. Like, I'm absolutely in there with those people, like, feeling their emotions. And, maybe that's what's dooming Suffragette, is it's just not a great film on that level. But I do think there is a tendency, especially in the Oscar pundit game, to look at a movie, to judge a movie by its poster to some degree, to be like, oh, there's a white woman, there's a non-white person on this poster. Yeah. Are the Oscars ever going to go for that?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't, the Oscars, that doesn't cut them, and I've certainly taken them to task for their, I mean, they can learn lessons too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I kind of want to take a bit of a jump. Okay. In that we were, it's not going to be too much of a segue, but it will be a little bit, because we were talking about Joy earlier, and films about women, and as anybody listening might have seen on AwardsWatch, there was a test screening of Joy last week in the LA area, and I was fortunate enough to have two members from AwardsWatch that I know personally, so they are well vetted, who saw the film and reported back in some very great detail about tone, drama versus comedy, category placement, and screen time, and stuff like that. And I put that out there as a piece that, and it actually, I mean, if I look at my piece, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I only have 5 quotes from these two different people, and since then I've actually had a couple of more people message me from AwardsWatch that had seen it, so I have a few more ideas about it, but I don't want to just say things without the ability to verify yet. And so I wrote a piece around these reactions and looked at it, historically from David O. Russell's box office and Oscar trajectory of his last 3 films, which keep getting more and more each time, although less Oscars wins each time. And kind of wondering what the hesitance has been for a lot of pundits to predict it, because AwardsWatch has been pretty bullish on the film getting a lot of predictions, a lot of nominations very, very early on in the season. And kind of like what we were talking about before, AwardsWatch has not really jumped onto this wait and see train like a lot of pundits have. We've stuck with a pretty traditional way of doing things, which I kind of, it's probably because I started out at Gold Derby with Tom O'Neill, and that's how we did things then, and I've just kind of carried that through personally for the last 15 years. But what happened after that was a huge response from the pundit community, with varying degrees of compliment and insult and shade. I'll say that much, and a little bit of misinformation too. People that did not understand that I had not personally seen the film, that this was coming from other members. So I got accused of being just this David O. Russell fanatic,
which we all know you are.
Clearly, And for the record, I'm not, because I think his last great film was Three Kings. I haven't been a big fan of his the Oscar-y side of his career. I thought American Hustle was pretty good. I didn't like Silver Linings Playbook. Fighter was okay. So I don't have a personal investment in the success of Joy at the Oscars other than the desire to be right early, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of what's happening is a lot of these pundits have, like, I think about when I first started really writing on the internet, it was at the precursors to those forums. Like, that was back in, when I was working jobs I hated and needed ways to screw around.
Oh, so yes.
I would just go online. And then, like, as I've sort of advanced in my career to bigger and bigger platforms, like, the bigger a platform you're on, like, you look at Chris Tapley, his career has roughly paralleled mine in very strange ways.
And we all came from the same place.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you look at his career, like, you go to Variety, you can't stick your neck out as much as you can, even when you're at HitFix. And, like, when you're at your own site, you can stick your neck out more than when you're at it. So, like, to a degree, it's like, political pundits can sort of say, well, it seems like Hillary Clinton will win the Democratic nomination, but they have to be like, that's some of what's going on here, is that, once you're at Variety, you can't say Joy is the runaway frontrunner when nobody's seen it. You have to be like, it seems like it could be. And even that's getting sort of pulled back a little bit because I think people have gotten burned a little too much, a little too many times in recent years.
Absolutely. And it's, if for example, that test screening had come back and I know it's just a test screening. There are things that can be changed and tweaked. And I know that they are working on, getting the tone right. Because from the new bit of information that I got, this is going to be a very different type of David O. Russell movie. Dream sequences and some very, very different elements than I think that we're used to. So he's got, I think, 3 or is it 4 editors on it now. So, I mean, clearly there is a desire to find exactly the right, story to tell here.
Right.
But if the response had come back, mediocre or lukewarm or negative in any way, I would have reported the same thing because, I was really stoked that we had people at the screening and that I was going to be able to get the first word out to people. So it wouldn't have really mattered to me if it had come out bad or good. I was glad that it was good because of how much prediction investment we have in it. But if it was bad, I would have been dropping it like crazy down to a more realistic possibility that a lot of other pundits have. I mean, most people have Jennifer Lawrence in, but just not anything or anyone else. Right. So,
and I think that some of it so is you kind of have to play the game. Once you're at a larger publication, like
yes,
the stakes of what you or even like someone like Sasha Stone can lose are much less than the stakes of like if Chris says something that embarrasses Variety and then Variety like loses access in some way. So I think it kind of cuts both ways, but it's definitely weird. Like I remember 10 years ago, people would longer than 10 years ago, people would just predict the shipping news and everything.
Yes.
It came out and nobody liked it and it didn't matter. And now, like, everybody's, like, very cautious, and it's kind of strange.
I think you're absolutely right, and there is a big difference I think you hit upon. If you are either kind of an independent or if it's your own site or organization versus working for another one. Yeah. And especially for somebody like Tapley, who is brand new at Variety, and it's not like Chris Tapley is afraid to say what he thinks. No. you can go through his Twitter log and see that quite clearly. Yeah. But yeah, he represents himself, but he represents a much bigger product. So
yeah, for sure. It's just, it's. I feel like we talked about the three movies that haven't really been seen yet, outside of test screenings here and there, which there are rumblings about on sort of on the horizon.
Yeah, we actually had 3 people at the Hateful Eight screening with Tarantino too.
Oh, okay, great.
But that I didn't report too much on because there was so much more work that clearly needed to be done on it from Tarantino himself, and so I just sent out a few tweets and just a few bits of conversation in the forums, which people can have, but I didn't want it to be overly. That was an example of me being very cautious.
Yeah. But of those 3, one is from somebody who just won last year, so the Revenant could literally be the greatest movie ever made. And I think it probably wouldn't win Best Picture. It would probably lose to something else.
Yes.
But the other 2, like Joy and The Hateful Eight, like if both of those hit and if both of those are as good as they could be, that automatically makes things more interesting because neither David O. Russell nor Quentin Tarantino have won the 2 big prizes despite being up for them several times. Like David O. Russell doesn't have an Oscar at all. So
yeah.
That definitely adds an element of suspense, which may be why Quentin Tarantino is so quickly trying to shut down all of the major PR gaffes he inevitably makes every time he speaks to a reporter.
My goodness, he's having like a practically a Ben Carson kind of week. It's not going too well for him, but I don't know. If you're going to get interviewed by Bret Easton Ellis, your chances of coming off good aren't really that good anyway.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny too that we are all so carefully looking at these 3 movies that are all coming out on Christmas. Mm-hmm. 2 of them are from the same studio, when we still have not had a Best Picture winner from December since 2005.
Yeah. That's when you were like December, that immediately pinged for me. Because
December used to be the big month for your Oscar movie, and that has changed dramatically. And really, it's like October now.
Yeah. Like one of the things that Spotlight again has going for it is it comes out November 6th, so it's got a lot of room to work with. Whereas the thing about something like Joy is, if it hits the inevitable, well, this wasn't the real story of Joy, I don't know her last name.
Mangano, yeah.
If this wasn't her real story, or the even more inevitable, Jennifer Lawrence is 24, 25, why is she playing a woman in her late 30s?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to come back from that. You basically, it's gotten so corporatized and gotten so driven by publicists that you basically have to have the perfect controversy-less movie to win if you release in December, and nobody has that. Like that's one of the things that happened to Selma. It came out with such rave reviews, and then it just got hit by the LBJ wasn't like he is in the movie, which everybody knew was an Oscar campaign ploy, but everybody's like, okay, we're going to fall for this.
Yes, and I can see that very same thing happening with Joy and the controversy, between David Russell and Annie Mumolo's first screenplay, because I've already heard that conversation start.
Yes,
that this is going to be this focal point that David O. Russell took the screenplay from Annie Mumolo, so everybody hates David O. Russell, and I'm like, yeah, they kind of don't really if you look at the last 3 movies, but okay, sure. But I'm still really looking at something like Joy to potentially be the movie that brings voters together. It is led by a woman. It is going to be a classic only in America story. Woman, single, poor, welfare, invents something, becomes hugely successful. I mean, it's going to feel like a very traditional American story, but told through the eyes of a very artistic director. And I just feel like it's a combination that makes a lot of sense for voters. It gives them the the woman-led movie to win, because there hasn't been one since Chicago.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels right. As long as, the movie is good, it's successful, because I do think it has to be very successful. There's a lot that's going to be riding on Lawrence's shoulders for this movie, because it will be, a non-X-Men, a non-Hunger Games movie. And she hasn't had a whole lot of personal success. It is a big ensemble, but she is the clear star and lead. So a lot's going to ride on her.
Yeah. And it's that's the thing, is it's a very hard movie to sell. It's like, I really like that trailer, but it's like, here's a movie about a woman who invented a mop. Like, there's not really a hook there. Like, we've talked about some of the other female-led movies, and like Carol is like, here is an affair between two women in the 1950s. Like, that's an instant hook. And Room is like, that's even, here's a woman who's been kidnapped and she escapes captivity and has to readjust to life. Like, that is a high concept pitch. So,
yes.
Yeah, Joy is, I think, like I look at Joy and it certainly seems like it's a movie that could shake everything up, but at the same time, there's a lot of pitfalls there for it.
It is, and actually one of the things that came out, which I just got a couple of days ago, from the focus group, was one of the questions that they asked was, if you're telling your friends about the movie, how would you describe the movie? And the majority of people had a really hard time describing the movie.
Right.
Which obviously is not a good thing. Excuse me. You want to be able to, have your elevator pitch to your friends that, that's 5 seconds long. And if it is Jennifer Lawrence invents a mop, that's not going to be the draw that it needs, to be successful. It's got to be something bigger, some kind of bigger picture idea. And I think they're probably struggling with that of how the story is being told and how it's going to be told, by word of mouth. So
yeah, it's definitely like, I think they're inevitably going to fall back on, here's Jennifer Lawrence as you've never seen her before, which is absolutely fine pitch for that movie. But yeah, that's really the pitfall there. But I mean, you look at Hateful Eight, and like, that's,
oh my god,
directorial. Like, I'm expecting to love it, but it's directorial excess, like, almost to a fault.
Yeah,
like, it's a 3-hour movie that's going to show with an intermission and an overture in many cities, and almost takes place entirely inside a cabin. Yeah, it takes place in one location.
So it's basically like the scene in the bar in Inglourious Basterds, but 3 hours long. Yes.
Now, having heard a few things out of that test screening as well from a number of different people, I'm excited for it. I think it sounds good, but yeah, it's certainly a high degree of difficulty.
It is. I'm wondering if, and I don't know. I'm wondering if there might be some fatigue to Tarantino's N-word obsession, and what the threshold is going to be for people to, because from what I heard as well, this far outpaces Django Unchained in terms of usage and just level of over-the-top profanity and all kinds of different things for him as far as a movie goes. So I wonder. I'm extremely curious about what the response is going to be to this.
Well, it's Quentin Tarantino hasn't really. I mean, Django was kind of on the edge of this time when social media outrage springs up so quickly, but like it kind of skated by, because that movie was under the radar in a lot of really weird ways. This is not going to be like, Quentin Tarantino hasn't really come up against that yet, and it'll be interesting to see like both what sort of that movement makes of Quentin Tarantino and what Quentin Tarantino makes of that movement, because there's potential there for it to be just really almost hilariously so, like, terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like it's going to be like one or the other.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting too, in that Hateful Eight and Revenant both open the same day, and seemingly are competing for the same audience. But I think Hateful Eight is like wide Christmas Day, and Revenant is limited and then opens wider in January.
Yeah, I believe Joy is semi-wide Christmas Day too. So
yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty smart.
That's how I'm remembering it. Yeah, I think that is. Yeah, I think that's a smart call.
Yeah.
But it's a weird thing to open those movies on Christmas Day. I realize that they probably want to give everybody as much time as they can get. I keep expecting like Hail Caesar or Silence to just randomly show up. I mean,
everybody wants Silence to just all of a sudden be like, ta-da! Here I am at AFI, and I'm opening the week before Christmas.
Yeah, but
I think we all know Martin Scorsese's post-production schedule, hopefully enough to know that that's not going to happen.
Oh,
I mean, yeah, it's that's okay, because everybody is already. I mean, literally, this and everyone that laughs at how we do things will get an extra laugh at this. I mean, we already have our 2017 Oscar predictions threads like going in the forums.
Completely unsurprising.
Oh, absolutely, right? And of course, something like Silence is really, really high up there. So it is what it is. But all right. Cool. I think this might be a really good place to end a very quick and succinct kind of podcast. You can listen to it on the way to work or on the treadmill or whatever you might be doing. Watching something on TV you don't want to listen to. So it could be
listen to Oscar podcasts on the treadmill. Like that's
I do that, and I know that Gregory Elwood does. So. It happens.
I just want to briefly mention a shout out to the poor Oscar blogger who was murdered in the first episode of American Horror Story Hotel. That is really too bad.
That's really hilarious that you even bring that up, because what I was thinking of listening to a podcast and watching TV with it turned off, the first thing I thought of was American Horror Story Hotel. But yes, of the entire hour and a half, that first couple of minutes of that 47-year-old ... Oscar blogger, I basically stood up and just like walked out. I'm like, okay, you're coming right for me. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was awesome. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah. What a great way to end the podcast with American Horror Story Hotel.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd, so much for that. But all right, yeah, actually, thank you, Todd, very much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. I know it's a really short one, but I'm trying to make them a little, shorter and easier to swallow. We had like 2 hour and 2.5 hour podcasts in our first couple of years doing this, and I mean, my God, nobody needs to listen to me for 2.5 hours. My husband doesn't even listen to me for 2.5 hours, so nobody else does. But yes, thank you, Todd, and please, everybody listening, visit Vox.com, where Todd is the culture editor, and follow him on Twitter at Tvoti, TVOTI, and also, of course, follow AwardsWatch at awards_watch, and always check out the main page of AwardsWatch. There'll be little tidbits and information that I'm pretty sure you'll want to hear, and same goes for Todd.
Yes.
So, yeah. Thank you so much again, Todd.
Oh, well, it's great to be here. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye.